Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Breaking the Lens of Bias. My name is Kat Killian, and I'm very glad to be here with you today post election. Just so you know, this episode will be recorded. Unfortunately, I have another obligation during my lifetime, but I wanted to make sure to get you an episode today and timely. So anyway, so yes, it is post-election here in the U.S., and I believe none of us have a bias on this. I think I can speak for most everyone. We're so glad the election is over, and the ads are gone, at least for now, until the next election cycle, whether that be in 2 years or local elections coming up soon. And so I want to talk a little bit today about some of the biases going into the election and some of the things that we may hear. And this is based on past experience. We may or we may not hear them. I have yet to hear it in a more mainstream way, although there has been some grumbling. And this concerns um, the validity of elections and election fraud. Um, and I've done a lot of research into this, and as most people know, there have been a lot of calls about election fraud, whether or not there's been denial of the 2020 election results, or whether there has been an indication of fraud, as has happened in many states where they've changed the laws, in many cases, it making it more difficult for people to vote. Um, and so I kind of want to ask that. The question is that I know. Let me give you a little history first. All right, in Chicago, those of us in Chicago, we all know about old Mayor Daley, meaning the first Mayor Daley, and how the attitude was vote early and vote often, and having dead people vote and all that kind of stuff. And unfortunately, this is a myth that persists in certain areas. And while those kinds of things may have been happening back in the 60s, um, they're not really happening today. The nature of elections has changed greatly, and how we count those votes and the safeguards built in order to have safe elections um, are have changed a lot since that time, at least here in Illinois. And I would guess those same kinds of things happened elsewhere. Um, so when we had Bill Barr, Donald Trump's secretary or attorney general, saying about the 2020 election that it was the safest, most secure election that's been held up to that point. I don't know why we would doubt the Department of Justice in that. And then subsequent lawsuits were filed, as most of you very well know, that said that there was no validity in them. And people have come out and said there have been claims, but they haven't been able to substantiate those claims. And when there have been claims of fraud, and I'm not going to say it was zero fraud, those were addressed, and the individuals responsible for perpetuating the fraud or perpetuating the fraud um, were held accountable. There were people who had voted twice, and there were people who had voted for their dead parents. And so, so looking at that is, and saying, okay, this is what the facts are saying. This is what the attorney general said. This is when cases have been brought to the court, this is what's been said about this. So I'm kind of a little bit flummoxed as to why people are still saying that, either based on something that happened over 60 years ago, or why people are still thinking that it goes on today, even though there has been no substantial proof. I mean, people have claimed that there's proof, but to echo the old Wendy's commercial, where's the beef? Where is the proof, and why hasn't this been spread out and allowed to have a when there people have presented proof. There was a movie, I think it was called 2000 Mules, and this was about supposed voter fraud. But it was made on a partisan basis, and it came out and basically was rebutted. And the filmmaker, as far as I know, has not gone back and countered the rebuttal. And most people aren't willing to go to that extreme. And here's where your bias comes in. If you believe that elections are either fair and free or not, or somewhere in between, is, are you really looking at all the facts and investigating it deeply for yourself? Or are you stopping at a point where someone confirms what your bias is? So, um, Mike Lindell has gone out and said that. If you are a Mike Lindell fan and you believe what he says, um, where is the proof? He keeps saying there's proof. He keeps saying there's proof. And I keep going back and checking, and I'm not seeing any evidence of the proof. He's talking about some algorithms. What is the algorithm that he's looking at? He hasn't published that so that mathematicians can actually determine, and statisticians can determine whether or not that's a valid argument. But the fact that he's just saying it without providing that proof, um, to me, it doesn't pass the smell test. So those who are, who believe that might stop and say, "Oh, well, Mike Lindell's saying it. He's got people saying it, so it must be true." Um, and by the same token, when the Attorney General, uh, Department of Justice, says that these elections are fair and free, um, and that was immediately after the election. And what was that based on? That was based on non-reports of fraud throughout the country, and as these elections were being monitored. But the thing that people need to keep in mind is that there are safeguards in these elections to confirm whether or not people are who they say they are. At any point, at least here in Illinois, and again, my understanding of very specific election rules in other states is lacking. So your state may vary, and if you are listening to this and you are not in Illinois, and anything that I'm saying is researched and countered to what I'm saying in your state, please educate me. I don't know it all, and that's part of breaking the lens of bias, is that you need to be educated, and then I can go back and I can look at the evidence that you provide me. But getting back to it now, in Illinois, um, at some point you have to show an ID to register. It could be proof of when you're going to the Secretary of State's office and registering, or getting your license or ID, and the evidence that you have to provide that you are who you say you are. Um, then thus gives you a photo ID, and you can use that to register. I mean, then you can also have a registration card. But there's also another check where you actually have to sign the document. It's on a touch screen, and basically you're attesting that you are who you say you are. So right there is that, again, if you're not who you say you are and that gets challenged, you could be held legally responsible for that, or perhaps if somebody's voting in your name. Um, but there are reasonable checks and balances to that system, and you only get one vote. Um, Luckily, my wife has been an election judge the last two cycles, and I actually learned quite a bit from her on the specific details of the process as to how people have to register, what happens with absentee ballots, et cetera, so on and so forth. So, um, in Illinois, as far as I know, there were not any substantial uh, accusations of election fraud. I'm sure there may have been a couple here and there, um, but nothing to the point. Of course, Illinois is not a battleground state where we are solidly in the blue, and so the vote has gone that way. So it wasn't a place where election deniers or people challenging the election results wanted to submit that their claims. So it was looking at more of the battleground states. So going forward in looking at these things, if as the election results come out, and there's still in a number of states results to come out in very hotly contested elections. One in particular is Arizona, where the challenger Hobbs is leading Carrie Lake, who has been a vehement election denier, and basically saying that if I don't win, the election is fraudulent. And that's a dangerous territory to go. I'm going to assume that most of my listeners believe in our democracy and want to have free and fair elections. Obviously, we all want our candidate to win, no matter where we're at. However, election denying without substantial proof, or in some cases without any proof other than allegations, um, leads to this distrust of the system that many people have had, and can lead us away. If you are actually looking at what has happened in other countries, situations like that have led to basically a lack of election integrity, because there's only one way to vote. And whether that has been in a communist country, or whether that has been in a fascist country, or a country where it's largely one party rule because one party has taken over and changed the laws and has done that, you find that the election denying is strong when there is opposition, and opposition is crushed. Look at Alex Navalny. I may have the name wrong. Uh, the pronunciation of the name wrong, but how he has been trumped up charges, put in prison because of his anti-Putin beliefs. Um, and I believe that is uh, a recipe for disaster in terms of keeping a healthy democracy. So, in saying all that, rather than look at a specific bias or to do that, I'm concentrating today on getting you, as these revelations will come out and these accusations will come out, um, and cases will come out. What I will ask you to do, what I will do myself, is to seriously take a look at those. Who is saying it? What is their agenda? That's the first thing that's most important. What is someone's agenda? What are they trying to accomplish? What do they want? What do they get out of saying that and having people believe it and go forward? That'll be my first kind of clue, and they can be on either side of the aisle. That's the first thing, or they can be in the middle. They could be nonpartisan and actually looking at these things in a more factual kind of way, with analysis that is shared freely and openly. Um, so that's the first thing that I look at. And the second thing I look at is, again, is the legality of it. So are the challenges legal? Do they fall within the laws? But there's also something to, in the 2020 election in particular, because of COVID, and that was an experience that none of us have had before. None of us in the world have had before, where we have been in a serious lockdown because of a virus that, in many cases, caused death to people, and serious illness. And I'm not here to debate that whole issue, but so we had that issue, and there had to be ways, just as we learned new ways to work, new ways to go to school, and we also learned from that experience ways not to go, do work and not to do school. Um, but we had to adapt, and we had to come up with new ways to do things. Whether or not those were successful is still up to debate, and by and large. But the point was that we did have to react, and we had to change the way we were doing things and thinking of certain things. That did not negate the the safety checks that have already been built in the system, the changes that were made to accommodate that were by and large incorporated into those safety checks, those signature checks that people had to be registered. They had to have at some point shown a picture ID. Signatures had to match. And if they didn't match, my wife told people this signature doesn't match when they didn't have an ID with them. They just had their voter's registration card. And a lot of times it was people just, signing like you do in a credit card machine. And they actually had to do their official signature as they would sign on a check or on a document, a legal document. And got away with that. So there are checks in the system, and the election judges are trained to do that. I don't think they want anybody to deny that election. So, or the right to vote. So, so looking at these things, so when these accusations come out, who is it? Who is doing the accusing? What is their agenda? If they have an agenda, then are those claims accurate, or are they one off? So a lot of times with bias, we hear, oh yes, there was this person doing this and dropping off a vote. Well, one example was actually on The View the other day. One of the hosts, Sunny Hostin, was saying how she was dropping her son's absentee ballot off because he's away at school, and so he's registered at his home address, which is where she lives. But since he's away at school, she was dropping off his absentee ballot, and there was some issue with that. And she was astute enough to question that because somebody told her, "Oh, just put it in this orange bag," and it was like she was like, "What?" And those ballots should be going into a secure locked box. And upon her inquiry, the election judge did check, and yes, was told, oh no, this was the wrong place to put it. Yes, put it in this slot in the locked box, which doesn't get opened up until after the polls close. Now, was that a case of fraud, or was that just a case of somebody not knowing their job? I don't know that particular instant, but taking a case like that, somebody could make a case that, oh, they're trying to, store votes illegally. And I choose to live in a world where people may make mistakes on things. If you've ever had the opportunity to be an election judge, you have a few hours of training and then you're tossed into it and expected to know all this thing. And you may encounter situations that, the training just kind of went over, and you may have done it a couple times but never encountered it before. People trying to bring absentee ballots to the ballot poll when they have to go in a different method. So there's a lot of things to that makes a complex situation easy to not understand all the nuances of it in order to do that. But that is why the election judges have the contacts in the office and can double check on that. But we as citizens also have to recognize that there could be fraud. What is the basic procedure? And if you see something that doesn't pass the smell test, ask the questions about it. That's the responsibilities that we have, instead of just saying, oh, well, there's fraud going on because they told me to put it in a bag. Or I heard that in another place, that's what happened. So I know there's fraud going on all over the place. And that, again, like I said, that may not be the case at all. We don't know the specifics. We don't know the details of that. And that's why investigations do need to happen in order for us to be able to figure these things out. So before coming to a conclusion about something, if you see something that confirms or denies your bias, don't dismiss it. Pause, investigate, and then proceed if you feel like you must form an opinion on that. But that investigation portion is so important to break any biases that you may have and to become a fully informed citizen in the country, in the world, or in your community. So I'm going to end it with that today, and we will see how the elections fair. And I hope that as we go forward, I'll be talking a little bit more about how we can work towards uh, making sure that our democracy is safe, and things that we can do as individuals beyond just voting in order to make sure that our voices are heard and that our points of view are important and validated, because voting is one way to have your voice heard, but there are plenty of others too. And I think it's important to engage in our democracy, in our electoral process, in our local elections, uh, state elections, county elections, federal elections, in order to make sure that the things get done that we want to get done, that the laws that we want to see are happening, and to lobby for those rather than rely on someone else who's got a specific agenda, which and they are just co-opting and leaning into your bias and preying on your biases, um, in order for you to vote a certain way, for them ideally to get power. And remember, all these people that we voted for are our representatives. They represent us. So we have to make sure that we're not leaning into their biases, but we are looking at ours, and we are making informed decisions, not only at the polling places, but in how we interact with our representatives, and in requesting that they serve us and our best needs, whether it be for local school boards, library districts, municipal services, county services, state services, federal services, and so on. So, thanks for tuning in today for another Breaking the Lens of Bias. I will see you next week. Bye.